The Weeping Mists of Blackwood Isle, long-form horror cinematic script, Parologue. The inheritance of Asatio W.S. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a postman whose hands shook as he handed it to me. It was bound in heavy, midnight blue vellum, and bore the wax seal of a family I had long forgotten of. Perhaps a family that had spent centuries trying to forget me. My name is Elias Thorne. I was a simple archivist in London, a man who lived among the scent of old paper and the safety of electric lights. But the letter changed everything. It informed me that my distant uncle, Silas Blackwood, had passed away, leaving me the sole heir to Blackwood Isle, jagged piece of rock off the coast of Cornwall, accessible only when the tide was low, and cursed by the locals since the time of the Vikings. I should have burned that letter. I should have stayed in the smog of London. But greed is a quiet whisper that drowns out the loudest warnings. ... Chapter 1. The CROSS Cyng. The train journey south felt like a descent into another world. The green fields of England slowly gave way to the harsh, grey cliffs of the Atlantic coast. By the time I reached the village of Oakhaven, the sun was a dying ember on the horizon. "You're going to the Isle?" the fisherman asked, his eyes white with cataracts. He refused to take my money. "I'll take you across because the law says I must, but I won't wait for you. Once the mist rolls in, the Isle belongs to the Weepers." "The Weepers?" I asked, trying to sound brave. The old man didn't answer. He just rowed. The sound of the oars hitting the water was the only noise in the oppressive silence. Ahead, Blackwood Manor rose from the fog. It was a skeletal structure of black stone, perched on a cliffside that looked like a jagged tooth. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a cage. When my boots hit the wet sand of the Isle, a sudden chill gripped my heart. The air here was different. It tasted of salt, rot, and something ancient. "Don't go into the cellar, boy," the fisherman whispered as he rowed away into the fog. "And whatever you do, don't answer the door if you hear a woman cry. The dead on this island don't know they're dead." Chapter 2. The house that beareth the front door of the manor was 12 feet high, made of ancient oak and reinforced with iron band. It didn't need a key. As I approached, the lock clicked with a sound like a breaking bone, and the door swung inward. The foyer was a cathedral of neglect. Dust lay like snow on the grand staircase. Massive oil paintings lined the walls, portraits of the Blackwood ancestors. Their eyes seemed to follow me, their painted faces twisted into expressions of eternal agony. I found a candle and lit it. The flame flickered wildly, though there was no draught. "Hello," I called out. The house answered. A low, rhythmic thumping started deep beneath the floorboards. Thump, thump. It wasn't the sound of a machine. It was the sound of a giant heart beating in the chest of the earth. I made my way to the study. On the desk sat a leather-bound journal. My uncle's last entry was dated only 3 days ago. The handwriting was erratic. The ink smeared as if his hands had been shaking uncontrollably. "They are in the walls now," it read. "The salt isn't keeping them out anymore. I can hear the mists scratching at the glass. Elias is coming. I've left him the key. God, forgive me. I've left him the key." Chapter 3. The first night he decided to sleep in the master bedroom, hoping the height would give me a sense of security. But sleep is a luxury Blackwood Manor does not allow. At precisely 2:14 a.m., the scratching began. It started at the window, a slow, rhythmic scraping of nails against the glass. I lay frozen, my breath itching in my throat. I told myself it was just the wind, or perhaps a tree branch. But there were no trees on the isle. I sat up and turned my flashlight toward the window. Beyond the glass, the mist was pressed tight like a living creature, and there, etched into the condensation on the outside of the glass, was a handprint. Not a human hand. The fingers were too long, with too many joints. Then the whispering started. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the pillow next to my head. "Elias, open the door. It's so cold in the water. ... Open the door." I bolted out of bed, heart hammering against my ribs. I ran into the hallway, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The hallway seemed longer than it had been during the day. The doors I passed were all shut, but as I ran, I heard them opening behind me, one by one. Kriak, Kriak. Chapter 4. The gallery of the Damnedi reached the portrait gallery. I stopped dead in my tracks. The paintings had changed. The ancestors were no longer sitting for their portraits. They were now standing at the edge of the frames, their wooden hands gripping the edges of the canvas as if they were trying to climb out. Their eyes were no longer paint. They were wet, glistening, and staring directly at me. One portrait, a woman in a tattered wedding dress, began to weep. Real tears, thick and black like oil, ran down the canvas and dripped onto the floor. "Who are you?" I screamed, my voice cracking. The woman in the painting opened her mouth. Her jaw dropped further than any human jaw should, revealing a throat that was filled with sea sand and tiny, writhing crabs. "We are the price," she gargled. "The Blackwoods promised a soul every 50 years to keep the isle from sinking. Silas failed. Now the sea has come to collect." Chapter 5. The floodie felt a sudden wetness around my ankles. I looked down. Sea water was bubbling up through the floorboards. It was rising fast, but it wasn't normal water. It was black, freezing, and it smelled of a 1,000-year-old grave. I ran for the stairs, but the wood had turned to a gelatinous substance. My feet sank into the steps as if the house were trying to eat me. I scrambled to the 3rd floor, the water chasing me like a predator. I ducked into the library and slammed the door, bolting it. I was safe for a moment. or so I thought. Then I noticed the books. They weren't sitting on the shelves. They were hovering an inch off the wood, vibrating with a low hum. I pulled one from the shelf. Its title was The Geography of Non-Existent Places. I opened it, and the pages were blank, except for a map of the very room I was standing in. On the map, a red dot indicated where I stood, and a dozen black dots were shown surrounding me. I looked up from the book. I wasn't alone. In the shadows of the bookshelves, they were standing, the weepers. They were tall, gaunt figures, wrapped in grey, sodden rags. Their faces were nothing but smooth skin, no eyes, no noses, only a vertical slit for a mouth. They didn't move. They just stood there, dripping salt water onto the expensive rugs. "What do you want?" I whispered, backing away toward the window. The vertical slits of their mouths opened simultaneously. A sound emerged that tore through my mind. The sound of 1,000 drowning ships, of 1,000,000 souls screaming